In the last couple of videos, we've seen a few small examples of this. A property tag with that inject equals syntax tacked onto the end. And that was just used as a shortcut for creating an instance of some model CFC in our application. Really, it wasn't doing much more than just saving us from typing create object or get instance over and over in our code. Well, that's really just the start of what you can do with the inject keyword. In fact, there's an entire domain-specific language, or DSL, embedded within the functionality of that inject syntax. And we're going to look at some examples of how those work in this video. We also used the inject syntax earlier as a way to get the data source out of our ColdBox config file, as we can see here. But we kind of skipped over the explanation of what it's doing. Here we don't have the name of a model in the inject statement. We've got ColdBox :setting Vandelay DSN, three things separated by colons. The first item, ColdBox, we'll call this the namespace. You'll see a few of these used in ColdBox applications. In this case, we're using the ColdBox namespace, then dipping into the ColdBox settings and grabbing the setting Vandelay DSN. We configured this in our ColdBox CFC file back towards the beginning of this video series. You can use the same syntax to inject settings from your ColdBox CFC and make it available to your application as a variable, and that's what we've done here. We've taken this setting out of config ColdBox. You can see here is our Vandelay DSN data source. And that's what's being injected into the variable DSN right here by this property tag using that inject syntax. We've got several other variations of the inject syntax that you can use for various types of functionality. Really, all the inject options do the same thing. They cut down on you having to type boilerplate lines of code in your application. Instead of calling create object or get instance over and over in your app, you can just inject different things and have Wirebox take care of creating the objects for you. As your applications grow in complexity, this can be a big time saver and will cut down on some of the verbose blocks of code in your application. So here we're taking a look at a page out of the Wirebox documentation, and we've got some examples of how to use the inject syntax on the screen we can take a look at now. Here we've got pretty much what we've seen as what I'd call the default property statement, property and then a name of just some variable you would create in your component. And then here we have the inject word by itself off to the side. That's basically a shortcut for saying inject equals user service. If the name of the thing you're injecting is the same as the name of the property you want to assign it to, you can just say inject, and Wirebox will use user service as the name of the thing it goes to look up in your model folder, and it will save it into a variable also called user service. You can also use the name of a mapping as a value to inject. So if you've named something, say in your Wirebox binder file, security service, something in your Wirebox CFC, you can then inject that item from there and save it as a variable to reference with a property tag as security. I can also use the full namespace for items, go get something out of the model folder, model namespace rather, called user service, save it into a property like so. I can also do this, go find the role service CFC, create an instance of it, and inside role service CFC, there's a method called getRoles. Go run that method and assign whatever the results of that method are into a property called roles and save that as a variable that we can use later on in our code. And finally, we can also use modules. Remember, modules are entire other ColdBox applications that live inside the ColdBox app we're dealing with here. Well, if I have a separate ColdBox app called myModule, I can inject something from there into this property tag by using that @ symbol in front of the name of the module, and Wirebox will take care of the rest. So they're all grabbing pieces of data or running code in other CFCs somewhere in my code base. The different types of syntax you use just depend on if you're pulling a CFC out that has the same name as what you want to name your property, if you're pulling it from a specific instance of something, if you're using an item that was named in the Wirebox CFC, or if you're grabbing something from the module separate from the application you're working on currently. Property tag, and then use inject equals and whatever variation of the syntax you want at the end, and they all work exactly the same. Dependency injection is a pretty big topic. We could do an entire video series on all the features available to you because of dependency injection and AOP. What we've seen here is just the tip of the iceberg. To learn more about this and related features in Wirebox, please refer to the documentation at wirebox.ortusbooks.com.